Hello and welcome back to another episode of Real Talking ELT. Just me today. This is actually going to be a super quick one, but it got me to thinking because I was having a chat with, per usual, I was having a chat with one of the CELTs in one of the courses. They're in the second half of the course. So now they're starting to think about, okay, so I've done all of these things, I'm wrapping things up, and they're trying to think about, well, what does this mean for me? Because they've invested time, money, effort, all of that good stuff into getting a professional certification. So then what does that mean moving forward? And so the woman that asked me, lovely, nice candidate, doing fine in the course, everything like that. So, she's assuming, and it's a good assumption, that she's going to be getting her certificate. And she said, and then she asked me, she said, hey, listen, I wonder if you could give me some guidance on this, and actually stumped me. And it's very, very rarely am I at a loss for words. But she did stump me, because then I never really sat down and considered it too much. Because I work mostly on the tutoring end in CELTAs. I don't work on the job placements and things like that afterwards. A lot of the centers that I work for, I'm working for 4 different centers right now, and each center kind of has their own way of dealing with job placement, job hunting, networking type of stuff. And they have professionals that are kind of dedicated to that area that run those sessions and things like that. I'm just worried about, can you give lessons? Let's focus on your teaching skills and all of that good stuff. Anyway, so she asked me, which is a valid question. She should be able to ask me, you know what I mean? And she asked, and she said, well, with the CELTA certification, what would be a recommended percentage increase in my pay? Now, she's located in the Middle East. I thought to myself, I was like, because I haven't taught English in the Middle East. One, let me just break it down why I got a little stuck, because usually here's the blanket statement. If you have a CELTA certification, then usually centers pay you more, you can demand more. So if you've been out of an institution and then you finish your certification, then usually you can say, okay, so now I need an increase in pay, hourly rate, salary rate, however that works. But then she asked me that question, and I said, okay, well, where are you working? And she gave me some details that she was working in language center, but she was looking for other places and she might be moving to blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh gosh, okay, so well, and here's where I think maybe sometimes I think about these things a little too much. I can't give her, though, like a very specific percentage that she can say, well, I've got the CELTA certification now, so I want 10 to 15% increase in my salary. I don't know. And the reason that I don't know is because once I got CELTA here in Brazil, I've taught international students, but I've always resided in Brazil as an English teacher. Now, Brazil, that sounded like an evil laugh, and I do have an evil villain laugh, which is fun. But okay, yeah. So Brazil, the education system here in Brazil is not great, public nor private. Not a great education system. Very inconsistent. The ideology and stuff that they have here about how students should be treated, it doesn't align with me, but like perspectively, like I'm talking about general education, that students can, all they have to do is show up, and if they show up and they have attendance, then they pass the grade and they get moved on to the next grade. I mean, there's crazy things like that kind of happen here. If that has changed, then please feel free to put in the comment section that has changed. But as far as I know, as of 2025, yeah, there's just a thing about you just have to show up and breathe in the seat, and attendance is sufficient for some students, and some locations should just move forward and move grades. Like, grades don't count. Insanity, I know. But this gives you a really good insight into the value that the general population puts on education. Not a whole lot. Let me just clarify that. Not a whole lot. I work in education, and I work in like a tangential education, just English language teaching. That's all I do. I don't go into bilingual schools. I mean, I help them with training and stuff like that, but I don't go and I don't teach in bilingual schools. That's not my focus. I don't go into regular schools. I have done training for English teachers, but it's because their focus is it's teaching English. So that's the only sector of education that I work in. I don't claim to be education. Nope. English language teaching. That's what I know. So English language teaching is even like this subset of education. So you can imagine that the only reason that people put a little more value into English is because they see English as a tool for better opportunities, working in multinational companies, possibly traveling, doing internships or exchange programs as university students. So, there's a little bit of value thrown into English because they see it as a stepping stone for socioeconomic gains, which is fine. So, but in terms of regular education, I'm not in that sphere. All I know is what I see. I don't have children here, so I'm very kind of one step off of the main education. I just work in a very special area of education, English language teaching. And okay, so Brazilians typically don't put a lot of there's not a lot of emphasis. There are now. I'm making a general sweeping statement because if you go into some of the states in the north and northeast, northwest, but mostly northeast. I think there was some statistics that came out. I'll take a look. I probably should have Googled them before I came in, but to do this little episode. But it's roughly between 10 to 20% of the population in the northeast of Brazil are illiterate, functioning illiterates, meaning can't read, can't write. So, I mean, up to 10 to 20% of the population. I saw those statistics recently and I was like, oh my God. Yeah, and it was from like a viable source, I believe, and I can't remember the exact, but they did it by state, each state. Anyways, so you can imagine if people can't read or write, like what like how they don't put a lot of value into education. Why am I talking about this? Back to the main story. So I thought to myself, well, after I got my CELTA, I did get a bump in pay. I can't remember how much it was. I think it was like 15 to 20% in my hourly rate, something like that, more or less. Maybe like 10 to 15% if I remember correctly. I can look at my pay stubs. Anyways, I got a decent little bump in my pay. I was a senior teacher at the time at a school, blah, blah, blah. So I got anywhere from 10 to 20% bump in my pay. But I think it was right around 15, 17% per hour because I was working hourly. But then, we don't get paid that much. If we look at an international, because people always ask, well, what is it in US dollars? I was getting paid dirt cheap when I started working. And even after CELTA, I was getting paid not a lot per, I mean, if you do the exchange rate out now, it was maybe $7 per hour. Not even kidding. Dollars. I mean, in how it was different, and it was it was okay, but the inflation now is out of control. So, anyway, so this lovely candidate asked me, she said, well, what can I ask for in terms of a price? I have no idea, because there's certain cultures that value education more than other cultures. There's certain regions of the world that put a premium on English, and there's certain regions that are focused on other things, whether it being bilingual or multilingual. So English isn't so, how can I say this? It's here in Brazil, English is the language to learn. Most people can kind of get away with learning just a tad bit of Spanish, and then they do a little Portuñol mixture of Portuguese and Spanish, and then it kind of works for them. And we're neighbored by all Spanish-speaking countries, so even if they kind of travel in South America, they have exposure to Spanish, and it's pretty close to Portuguese, so the people pick it up quite quickly. But the one that's like, the one that we have schools all over the place, programs, it's English. So there's a premium on English, but unfortunately, in Brazil, premium on English because they see it as a stepping stone for better opportunities. But culturally speaking, education is not super important. So this is why we have like very high turnover rates in English schools and things like that because people don't prioritize education. It's a different culture. Um, I grew up in the U.S. Like I'm American. I grew up in the U.S. Being multilingual was important in my area because I grew up in a very liberal community, that type of thing, and we didn't have many. Uh, Funny I say this, we didn't have many like immigrants and stuff like that in the city, like the neighborhood that I lived in, the city that I lived in. We didn't have too many immigrants that spoke second languages. The neighboring city was like the highest concentration of Cambodians outside of Cambodia. So there's lots of Southeast Asians in neighboring cities. And then when I was an adult and living with my then boyfriend, now husband, we lived in an area that was huge Brazilian population. Brazilian, Hispanic, there was lots of Indian, so there was like very multicultural. And so I saw the value of being multilingual later in life. And like in my university as an adult, I tried to learn more languages. In school, it was just because you had to take a language, and I chose French because we were close to the Canadian border. We would go to Montreal for sports events with my grandmother, my mom, and my sister would travel, and we wanted to be able to order like the fancy bread. Anyways, I mean, yeah, so like because my surrounding community, like we didn't have it was multicultural, but it wasn't multilingual. There was lots of like in my city, there was lots of people with different ethnic backgrounds, but it wasn't multilingual. It wasn't that they were speaking second languages in their house. So I only really kind of saw the value of being multilingual when I was living in communities that I saw lots of different people speaking lots of different languages. And I was like, hey, I want to, kind of immerse myself in these communities and be able to go grocery shopping. It was mostly, mostly centered around food and like going into restaurants and trying different things out. So, yeah. I'm very much like I feel like I'm a dog sometimes. You know the dogs in the pound where they're like, is food motivated? Like if you give me a treat, I'll be your best friend. That's kind of how you win my heart too. Anyways, so okay, back to the story of this candidate that asked me. So then she's in the Middle East, and in the Middle East, it's funny because culturally speaking, I've been noticing that people in the Middle East, Asia, Southeast Asia as well, they're more traditionalists in terms of their expectations of how classrooms should be run and the way that the interaction between teacher and student. It's very interesting to kind of see that because I live in Latin America, so it's very like warm and everybody's, kind of vibing. And they're more like traditionalist types. And so I think that also kind of reflects the importance of education in those regions. And so why couldn't I answer her question? One, because I'm terrible with exchange. I don't know how much, like, for example, I make decent money, but I make decent money living here. And that's all I really care about. Globally speaking, I don't know where I rank in my earnings, but that doesn't really affect me because I earn in the currency that I spend, and I live here in Brazil. So for what I'm earning, it makes sense for me, but that value might not be the greatest, where they're living. So one, I'm terrible at exchange rates and how that all goes. Two, I don't know the culture that is there and what is kind of the cultural norms of per hour. And I didn't want to ask her because we were in a group, so, but I don't know how much people in that region of the world get paid per hour if teachers are valued there, if they're more valued than they are here, because teachers here, and, at least my experience, this is my personal opinion. Like, you can have your own opinion if you want. Teachers in Brazil are not valued. They work really hard, they burn out, and like there's super high turnover rates. So, and their salaries are really relatively low. It's similar to the US. I don't think teachers are valued in the United States either, and that's a reflection of society. So if you don't respect teachers and you don't pay them well, then you're really kind of making a statement about how much you value education. That's my personal stance on it. But her region of the world, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how much they make typically. I'm not sure how much, value there is, how much competition. Here in Brazil, we have lots of influencers that, offer courses for like $50, and it's like, oh my God. Like 0 to fluent, like A1 to C2 for $50, and you get a bunch of recorded. So people have these options. Because people have these options, teachers, freelance teachers, and institutions have to be more competitive. And then, of course, they go off into those. Sometimes we have schools and teachers who have a lot of integrity, and then we have schools and teachers that have 0 integrity, and they do some crazy stuff on the internet and the marketing and things like that. So yeah, all of these. Why am I telling you this? Because I thought to myself, well, this is an interesting topic. Like, she asked me point blank, I need you to give me the figure, the percentage. How much more can I charge for my services? And I had no answer for her because I don't know. One, I don't live in that culture. So I think regionally it makes a big difference. I don't know how in demand English teachers are in that area. I also don't know in that region of the world how educated and what levels of certifications people have. Here in Brazil, most teachers, teachers that work in public schools and private schools, they have to have their teacher's license and things like that. So they all have minimum bachelor's degree. English teachers, completely unregulated. Totally unregulated. If you're working in a language school, the government does not stipulate that you have any credential. You could be a middle school dropout, or you could have a PhD. Doesn't matter. That's insanity. You know what I mean? Like, that's flipping crazy for me. Okay, so I don't know. Is there a certain expectation? For example, here in Brazil, many people have bachelor's degrees. There's a good percentage of the population. I'm talking about English teachers only, people that only teach English. There's a good percentage of people that have a CELTA degree. It's not so uncommon, but you do still find people who don't have the initial the international teaching certifications, but they do have their bachelor's degree or something like that. Delta level programs, very rare. Master's degrees, usually only teachers in universities, professors in universities. PhDs, very small percentage. So it does very much form that triangle of hierarchy in education here. But it's not uncommon to find people with CELTA certifications. In that region, I don't know. What's the typical profile of a teacher there? Not sure. How much is the hourly rate? Because here in Brazil, honestly, 2025-ish, I've seen people making 12 real per hour, because it's like a salary type of thing. 12 real. Just for you to have an idea, the real is more or less like $5. So they're making like $2.50 an hour. US dollars conversion, more or less. Yeah, it's that low. It's that low. In some franchises, it's bad. On average, like a private freelancer or working for like a decent language school, you're going to be making between 35 to 50 per hour. So like $10 an hour, $10 an hour as an English teacher. if you go, and that's like classes, you know what I mean? Most often they hire you like a third party contractor and they pay you for the classes that you're there. So that doesn't count prep work or anything like that. If you start including those hours and you're $10 an hour, it's gonna drop significantly. If you work privately, it's more common that people are getting about 100 to 150 per hour in real, which would translate to like 20 to $30 per class. And then there's people that charge more than that. So there you go. That's more or less what people make here in Brazil on average. I mean, this is just totally anecdotal too. This is me talking to people and talking to different schools and stuff like that. So very anecdotal information. How does that compare to your region? I don't know. Is CELTA like a highly sought after qualification because the English teachers in that region are typically less qualified? Well, then I think you could probably, if CELTA is highly sought after, I think you could probably demand a little bit more. A good percentage of the teachers here in Brazil, English teachers here in Brazil, do have CELTA. So it's not kind of that like a very big differentiator between you and the other candidates. Delta is. Delta certainly is. So yeah, I didn't really know how to answer her question. And I think it's a good question, but I think it's very regional in terms of you have to figure out like who who in the region has these types of certifications, what's the average salary for English teachers, if people have this certain qualification compared to that qualification, what are they making? Is it a high demand? Because in some regions, I don't think English is as high as some other languages, to be honest. I'm not sure. Um, Especially ones that like English kind of is taught through the elementary, middle schools, and high schools, then you might not have that high of a demand. I mean, at least in like European countries, the education system there, I think is yeah, like decent-ish, not sure, never been, can't say, but I think it's decent-ish, and they tend to have English on the curriculum at some point, so people have kind of this basic knowledge of it. So then private teaching and private English schools, I'm not sure how much they would charge, because if most people are getting a basic English education as they go through not university but school, elementary, middle school, high school, secondary schools, and universities. I'm not, if it's kind of included in their curriculum there, I'm not sure how high the demand then is. For places with people who have large populations who want to immigrate to different places, that then maybe then there's more of a demand. Again, I'm not really sure. It was something that stumped me, but I think that there's a lot of different factors. One, kind of the general synopsis of, do people have exposure to the language in their regular school system growing up? Da, da, da. Two, the value that the population puts on education. Three, if the CELTA certification is considered a certification that is a differential when comparing candidates. In some regions, it's not. A lot of people have CELTA. I mean, thousands of people take the CELTA program every year. And so now it's kind of the market is becoming saturated with a bunch of CELTA certified teachers. So then what's going to be the next thing, right? You know what I mean? It's just like what happened with university degrees in the US. Everybody has a bachelor's degree. Everyone, like, not everyone. I can't say everyone. Lots of people have a bachelor's degree. So it's just like that's the minimum entry level qualifications, and then what are people going to do? Well, now we want master's degrees or MBAs or postgraduate degrees. It's the same thing that's going to happen in English language teaching for professionals, is that at some point CELTA is going to be kind of an obvious basic requirement, or something akin to CELTA, like a teaching certification. Like, you're not going to be able to walk into a language institute, eventually, at some point, you're not going to be able to walk in as a teacher and say, oh, okay, well, I don't have CELTA, but I have they're going to be like, yeah, you need the basic credentials. At some point, it's going to get to that point where the market is so saturated. So I think some markets, some regions have been very much saturated, and other regions are still kind of growing in the saturation of how many, the percentage of people who are teaching English have that certification. And until it reaches kind of a homeostasis of saturation state, I guess you could demand a higher percentage in your pay. But until that point, you won't really be able to. No, after that point, sorry, not before. After that point, you won't really be able to, because everybody's got one, or most everybody's got one, or there's a high enough percentage of people that have one that really it's not a standout qualification. All of this, wow, 25 minutes of me rambling, was just to say that I couldn't answer this person's question. I didn't know what to say. Yeah, and this is what's hard for English teachers, because it's not standard across the world. It very much depends on where you are, where you're teaching at, and how much that qualification is worth currently in the market, knowing that the market is going to change, because literally thousands of people take CELTA or something akin to a CELTA every year. And as its initial certification, initial qualification, there's a very high passing rate. So if thousands of people are doing it, it's in the 90, I think it's in the 90s for percentage of passing, because it's an initial certification, then the market's going to saturate quickly. Let's see what happens. Maybe they're going to make another certification in between, because they did have ICELT. They canceled that. So now we got CELTA and Delta, or Cert TESOL and Dip TESOL, or some sort of TESOL certification, and then what happens? It seems as if, but Delta, not everybody's achieving that. It's not a super high passing rate. People have to kind of go through that a little bit. At least that was my experience. I passed on the first time, because I'm stubborn. Anyways, things to think about. So do you really want to get a CELTA certification? Is it really useful for you? Well, yeah, I mean, maybe. Where do you want to teach? Are you just going to work privately? Because honestly, private teachers, students don't really care about that stuff. They care about their progress, and they care about if you're meeting their goals, if they're reaching goals and meeting needs, and they enjoy their classes. That's what they're caring about when studying with private teachers. But yeah, institutions care about it still. Do you want to work in an institution? I don't know. I certainly have had my fill for a while. Working with institutions in terms of, let me phrase this carefully. I very much enjoy working as a third party and collaborating with institutions. The 4 institutions I'm working with right now, love them because I'm actually doing what I'm doing. If you want to work for an institution as a teacher or as part of the administrative team, I'm not interested currently. I've had my fill. I'm probably going to have a little bit of taste in my mouth from that experience for, we'll say, at least a couple years. But yeah, if you want to work for an institution because you feel safer at an institution, yeah, they might require it for a little bit. I don't know. Students don't really care about your qualifications, though. In academia, people are very concerned about other people's CVs, resumes, whatever you want to call them. I don't know. I just like collaborating. I like working with teachers. Honestly, I've gotten to the point now where I like working with teachers. I like working with institutions who clearly have their shit together, organized. Does they have people working in the places that they need to be working? And when you work with them, it's like you do that. These are your responsibilities. That's what I love doing now. That's what I'm accepting. I'm not accepting any other. I'm working as a teacher trainer. That's what I like to do. And I work privately with my private students. That's it. So for me, it works out. I got the qualifications that I needed to be able to do exactly what I'm doing now. And I'm not going backwards. So yeah, I think it depends. CELTA, not sure what you can get for that. You certainly can ask for more money. How much more? I don't know. That's it for today. Talk to you later.